Here's the problem with salamanders. Their whole thing is fire, lava, flamethrowers, volcanic landscapes. But then someone gave them green armor. And suddenly, all that dramatic firelight turns into a neon mess. It's like someone went trigger happy on the contrast slider. That high contrast combo makes it really hard to build any kind of mood. Red light, like firelight, just washes green out, so either you keep the green and the fire separate, which can sometimes look disconnected, or you blend them together like some of the better artwork does, but then you're not really painting green anymore. And sure, there's some versions of salamanders where the green armor is a little more toned down, but I think the real key is approaching the fire in a controlled way and keeping the light off the armor to avoid any jarring transitions, while still bringing a bit of the glow into the environment itself. In this video, I'm going to be painting from dark to light, starting everything off muted and building up light and color where it matters most. The goal is to make the fire feel like it belongs and works with the armor and not against it. And this is part of my Horus Heresy project where I'm painting Marines from each of the 30k legions, and even though Salamanders have never been my favorite, this is my chance to give them a proper glow up. I'm especially excited about the basing. I'm going to be drawing inspiration from their homeworld of Nocturne, which is usually shown as a dark volcanic world, but I want to bring a little more fire into the mix, and I'll be taking some inspiration from some of the Hellsmith's artwork. Let's dive in and see if I can finally find a soft spot in my heart for the Salamanders. To start things off, I wanted to do a little bit of a conversion, and when I was looking for inspiration, I came across the artwork of the Pyroclasts. I love the idea of having the salamander hide draped over their faceplates, especially if they're going to be walking through a blazing hot environment. So of course we're going to be using our trusty magic sculpt, which I like to mix with green stuff for these cases because it makes it a little more elastic. And then I'm just using some parchment paper as a way to make it not stick while I roll it out into a sheet. Then we can start cutting things down to size with our hobby knife, and then eventually transitioning to a smaller tool to help shape the edges of our sheet, since I want a more ripped and torn look to our salamander hide. After that, we can carefully peel our sheet from the parchment paper and then start to gently shape it on our model. Now that we've got a nice secure fit, I can go in with these color shapers, which have a flexible silicone tip and are great for shaping things and creating a little movement in the cloth. I then went and tried to add the same sheet to the face and realized very quickly that it was way too thick. So I went ahead and rolled out a thinner sheet, which ended up being much nicer to shape around the face and chest area. And honestly, I wish I had done the same for the previous piece, but I was already committed. I added some pins to hold the fabric up, although even these ones were a little too big and I ended up decreasing them later on so they're not so obnoxious. And speaking of which, my least favorite part of the process was rolling out all these tiny pieces for the scales. But it is my favorite way to apply them because it's still easy to keep it clean and controlled and create nice clusters of scales. Now, when going through this process, I'd say it's really important to make sure that you maintain some size variation between your scales and also try to keep them in small clusters. It's also important to pay attention to the thickness not only of the main sheet, but of the scales themselves too, because if you make them too bulky, it's going to lose that fabric-like feeling. Let's move on to the painting stage, and we're going to be starting with a matte black primer, and on top of that, I'm just going to be doing a base coat of black green. Now I'm starting off everything fairly dark so that I can gradually build up my highlights and control the amount of that vibrant green that I have on the armor, because again, I don't want to overdo it in this fiery environment. I started off by painting the shoulder pads, which were done with Vallejo matte black that was quickly wet blended up into a dark gray. And then I went ahead and base coated the metallic details with the same black. Then moving on to the green armor, I decided to create a range of mixes starting from the black green and using grass green as a way to add warmth to the highlight areas and using Titan Buff as my overall highlight color.
So the first layer here is really just the black green with some Titan buff and a tiny bit of the grass green mixed in for a little bit of added warmth, but the idea here is still to keep it fairly cool so that it contrasts with the warmer parts of the scene, which are going to be much more intense. So really, I'm just using this stage to establish the lighting and bring out some general definition all around the armor. Then on the second pass, we moved into the grass green mixture, which was used to bring warmth to the key areas of the model, in this case leading us up the leg and into the knee pads and the waist. And of course, I would be using this color to hit all of the top facing surfaces. I then continue to add more warmth and brightness to the main focal point areas around the head and the chest. For the salamander hide, I went with a desaturated yellow-green. Since the main contrast was going to come from the red glow of the fire and the plasma weapons, I wanted this to just feel like it's an extension of the armor and not pull too much attention. I wanted to differentiate the scales themselves a little bit more, so I went with some thin layers of a darkened crimson to pick them out, which would then get further subdued when I added some highlights to them. For the metallics, I chose to go with bronze as the main color, with silver playing the secondary. And this bronze here is actually Balthazar gold from Citadel, but I find that it usually ends up looking a lot more like bronze than gold, so worked out well in this scheme. For the silver, I used a combination of Vallejo Air Chrome and Carbon Black, and I like to mix a bunch of tones between those two. And then I like to go and block in my main reflection points on the sword, and then just work the transitions in between those points. On shapes like this, it always ends up being the edge highlights that really pull it all together. And now it's time for our first bit of glow. And the first step of making things glow is making them bright. So I went ahead and put a white base coat on all of the plasma areas and the part of the sword that I wanted to have a bit of energy glow. And then I started layering on some fluorescent orange, concentrating it more strongly towards the top of the plasma coil and leaving it a little bit more transparent through the base of the plasma coil and the areas that I want to glow the brightest. Though I ended up having to go back in and bring in some more white towards the center of the plasma coil where I wanted to glow with even more of a bright hot spot. And here I would layer over some fluorescent yellow just to create more of that fiery transition. And then it was on to some freehand with the Salamanders logo. Now my trick for freehand usually is to try and pick a color that's close to the base color of whatever the shoulder pad is. And that way if you make a mistake, it's really easy to clean up. And then you just gradually build your brightness back up in successive layers. The other side would have the yellow flame logo, so I started off with the same approach, just sketching out the shape. I always start with kind of like a skinny version of it, which is meant to just give me some boundaries to work within, and then from there I can gradually add thickness and define its contours. Now, once the gray is done, I'll go in with my color layer, and yes, technically you can skip the gray layer if you're feeling bold, but I just like doing it as a preliminary step just to make sure I get the shape right, and then you can always add your coloring over top. I also went and added a highlight over top as well as a subtle shadow just to give it a bit more dimension on that shoulder pad. The last stage was just to add a bit more dirt and grime, so I mixed up a dark red tone and I used this to wash over the lower parts of the armor. And I'm just going to be adding some chipping and battle damage with a dark red color and then just throwing some quick highlights underneath to pick them out.
Okay, so now it's time to tackle the basing. I was really excited to get back into the fire because I love adding it to my bases in almost any environment. It's an easy way to add a touch of excitement to the composition and great for OSL opportunities. I first sculpted the fire designs a few years ago, and after building lots of bases with them, I felt like it was still missing some pieces. I found that for the most part, the size of the flames was just a little too large to use alongside other bits on a base, and it ended up always being more of a main feature rather than as a small detail. So I added a bunch of new designs to the pack and modified some of the old ones to make them more user-friendly and give you small pieces of fire that are easy to sneak in alongside those other bits. And while I was fired up about that, I also wanted to expand on the whole scorched landscape theme that Healthsmiths introduced. So we decided to bring the fire up into the trees with our new Burnwood pack. So everything's about to be glowing. And of course, fires do eventually go out, so I thought it would be a good time to also introduce some smoke designs as well. I tried to create a range of pieces from large, puffy smoke clouds to thinner, trailing lines of smoke, which are easy to combine with the fire and Burnwood pieces. Now all that was left was the ground, and I like the idea of Nocturne having a cracked and fractured landscape, which our Demonscape was perfect for. So I also decided to add 5 new designs to that pack to include some larger pieces that would help you to fill the landscape of a base more quickly. In total, we've got 2 new packs and 2 which have received updates on our resin product line and upgrades to the digital packs. And remember, if you've already purchased these packs in the past, these upgrades are yours for free. Just log into your account on epicbasing.com and grab the new files from your download section. And although Nocturne was my main focus in this, I decided to also do an alternate set of bases using the Concrete Rubble and Ruined Streets packs to create a burning urban environment. Here's how we put those 2 ideas together.
So kicking it off on the urban side, we're going to start with a dab of glue, on top of which we're going to lay our ruined streets. Now usually I like to use at least 2 of these pieces to cover the majority of the base, and then I'll go and fill the rest with Magic Sculpt. If you use the other 2 streets as a guide, it's actually pretty easy to get the Magic Sculpt to mimic the missing concrete. Just leave some cracks in between and you'll hardly notice the difference. We do a quick fit check for the model, add a piece of concrete rubble, and then we're going to layer some fire in the front. Add another small piece of rubble to the back, which I'm going to use as the origin point for this little puff of smoke. And then in the back here, I'm going to layer a larger smoke cloud. For a final foreground detail, I'm just going to add this little chunk of concrete, and that's how we make an epic flaming city. Now for Nocturne, the process is kind of similar. So first we're going to start with some glue to lay down our Demonscape. Now since this is more of an organic formation, you can kind of blend it into just some rough ground, or even place pieces on top of that other ground and create more of a layered look. On the back side, we're going to be placing our Burnwood, which is not on fire, and the main fire element will come in the front here. On the opposite side, we have room for a nice trailing cloud of smoke, and you can play around with the position to find the right angle for your composition. And let's not forget how awesome the actual burning Burnwood pieces can look. If you want to go all out on fire, this is the way to go. Though I do also love the simplicity of the flaming city, so I'm really glad that I did both. I want to give a quick shout out to Hired Gun Studios and El Miniaturista, who are both frequent users of our flames and have contributed helpful feedback for the new designs that were added to the packs. And if you love that vibrant, high contrast style, then definitely check them out on Instagram and have a look at their take on the salamanders in a fiery environment. For the airbrushing stage on these bases, I started from a coat of matte black primer, making sure that I covered everything thoroughly. And then for the directional lighting stage, I only went with a mid-gray because I didn't want to pump up the brightness too much, because I wanted the brightness to be led by the fire. And this just made sure I didn't get carried away with highlighting parts of the demon stone or the tree bark and then realize that I had made it too bright for the fire to properly glow. And despite my minimal highlighting, I still went and applied a black wash just to bring further darkness back into the cracks and deepen the darkness. Now usually when painting fire, I would lay down a base coat of white first, but in this case, I started with the darkest red color. I wanted to see if I could put the white down later and then just work the transition in between them. This also gave me a chance to start off with a more faint glow, and having an airbrush to disperse this definitely helps. You can do it by hand, and I did on some of the Ruined City bases, but it definitely is a lot more tedious. After I had the initial lighting set up, it was now time to paint the rest of the base and get some definition going. So I mixed up some dark grays, which I used to define all of the concrete blocks. And in both this example and the Nocturne one, really I was focusing more on painting edges, so I was defining the shapes rather than making anything too bright. I did do a second pass of highlights going slightly brighter, and I know that this layer here looks far brighter than it actually is. Once it dried down, it was a lot more subtle. But again, focusing mostly on defining the edges and picking out key details and highlighting some of the topmost surfaces. All right, then it's time to make it hot. So let's bring our white back into those flames. And I gotta say, one of the things I really enjoyed about putting the white in as this second step is it allowed me to focus on kind of painting the inner tongues of fire within these flame shapes. Sculpturally, I tried to make sure that there are clear lines within these flame shapes that are easy to pick out for these inner hotspots. For the next step, I decided to go with an airbrush layer of the fluorescent orange to start building our first layer of transitions. And then I continued to refine that by brush using the same fluorescent orange just to blend it into the red a bit better. I had to bring our hotspots back in one more time for the final layer, so I took some white and brought that brightness back in to the core of our flames, and then this would get a layer of fluorescent yellow over top. And it really is building in this last layer of transitions that makes those flames look really vibrant. As for some other details, the demonscape can look really cool if you work in some red into the cracks to give it that more molten, volcanic landscape type feeling. You can work in some ashy gray into the tree trunks and then also use some black to pick out some contrasting bark texture. And here's how they turned out with our salamanders in the city and on their homeworld of Nocturne. Now, despite the fact that Nocturne was my main goal here, I'm really glad that I ended up doing this urban scheme too, and I'm not sure which one is my favorite. So if you guys have some thoughts, let me know in the comments.
And there we have it, 2 hot environments for the salamanders to burn up. Now I'll admit, after this whole process, they may have found a tiny spot in my heart. I think the decision to not bring OSL onto the green armor was definitely the right call because it would strongly desaturate the green. And as long as the distance is managed between those two entities, I think this works okay. If I had a little more time to spend on these, I would like to clean up the rendering on the fire and add some more intentional highlights into the tree bark on the Nocturne bases. But I definitely think that starting out by painting the brightness of the fire helped me to make sure that I didn't overdo the highlights on the rest of the base and take away from it feeling like a dark landscape. And if you want to see more on the process of painting the fire, make sure to subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out for an upcoming video where we'll look at some of the key things that will make sure that your fire looks hot. As always, I appreciate your support in helping this channel grow so that we can keep bringing you more cool projects, hobby tips, and techniques. Until next time, my friends, go make it epic.